colleagues, and good morning, my dear comrades. This press briefing has been necessitated by the downgrading of Zambia's rating by Fitch Ratings Incorporated. And the Socialist Party views this as a very serious development that undermines the livelihoods of millions of Zambians. It's within that context that we felt it necessary to call a specific press briefing on this issue. And the best way of doing it is to step back and look at the Zambian economy. How did we find ourselves in this predicament? And let me quickly get back to a period in the early 70s. You will not be able to understand what's going on today if we don't take that step back in terms of our economic and political history. In the early 70s, there was a global crisis. And that global crisis was about the base metal prices declining, but at the same time, the cost of energy going up. So you had an oil crisis. For the first time, the price of oil was reaching historical levels. So countries were under dire stress to ensure that they meet their import bill for oil, for fuel. But it was also apparent that the base metal prices was sinking. The demand from the industrialized countries was lower. There was a general crisis of capitalism. For a country like Zambia, that at independence had reasonable, adequate levels of international reserves, the first few months was like, this is going to be a short-term issue, let's find a quick solution. And that quick solution was import your fuel, your oil, and airlift it. So this country used to airlift what it needed to run an economy. That's not sustainable. This country, within a period of 2 years, put up a pipeline that would bring crude oil and separate it here. So it had to put up a separator, not a proper refinery. That's the one that we call Indian. This country had to start constructing a road, and that road was going to offer us a new alternative route to the coast through a country that was not under colonial rule. That's Tanzania. And this country started working on a much more cost-effective ways of getting its imports out of the country. And that's how the whole Tazara project came about. So the reserves that this country had started drying up because of those huge infrastructure projects that were being put in place. There was no other way. The routes to the south were blocked. You had UDI. They were confiscating Zambian products that would come in. The route through Congo into Angola was blocked because Angola was under fascist colonial rule. So this country was stranded. And there was a lot of effort that was being exerted to ensure that the millions of Zambians were protected. 15 months later, it became apparent that this was not going to be a short-term fix, that the economy was headed over a long period of time for a major crisis. What was short-term turned out to be much more of a long-term problem. And with the reserves having dried, Zambia started borrowing. So if you look at Zambia's debt, get back 1976, get back 1977. This country started borrowing. Kaunda and his comrades spent a lot of time trying to convince the international community that Zambia needed not just development aid, but it also needed loans, grants, in order to sustain itself. Ten years later, that's around 1985, the base metal prices had not gone up substantially. the gaps that were being created were still apparent. The infrastructure that had been put in place in the first years of independence was deteriorating. So what looked like a small economy with good infrastructure, with proper social services, was becoming poorer and poorer every day. The big lesson was that the Zambian economy is relatively artificial. Our dependence on a single commodity is our undoing, and has remained so. But so long copper was doing well, politicians, those that manage the economy, forgot the fact that this is a dangerous situation. And by the mid-1980s, it was apparent that we had overborrowed. And where we had borrowed from, they were demanding back their money. From positive balances, from a country that hardly had $600 million of external debt, we became a country with external debt of about $7 billion. And with that amount, no one was ready to give us any money. Zambia had fallen into what they call a debt trap. We were now spending more on debt servicing than we were spending on education, on health, and the other social sectors. And people were feeling it. The biggest losers were the working masses. They went in the shops and there were shortages. They went to school, the schools could not afford the textbooks, the exercise books. They went to the hospitals, in the hospitals there were no drugs. We were not even able to pay the health workers decent wages, and they were running away from this country. We lost a lot in terms of brain drain of qualified people because the system was collapsing. And with the collapsing of the economy, the politics of UNIPI, the monolithic structures of UNIPI, were also coming to an end. Yes, there were external factors. The challenges of the Soviet Union and many others brought about the surge for capitalist changes. And we were all looking forward to that. We were all looking forward to a Zambia where we would have several political parties, a Zambia where people could access a little bit of foreign exchange, a Zambia where the schools would look more or less the same like the schools we had in the 60s and 70s. So that was the dream of the Zambians. Come 1991, you had a new government into power, and that new government promised Zambians more freedom. It promised Zambians an economy that was liberalized, an economy that would create jobs, an economy where essential commodities were not going to lack. And the Zambians bought it. And for a moment, we thought we were on the right track. But we had the huge debt burden. What do you do with the almost $7 billion that was hanging on our heads? And we were still paying back more than we were putting into the social sectors. And by the way, it wasn't just Zambia that was facing that crisis. All the countries on this continent, the 54 African countries, were going through that crisis. When the fuel prices change, when the base metal prices change, all extractive economies are affected. The multilateral institutions were given the responsibility to sanitize our economies. There was a program called Structural Adjustment Program that came into being. Structural adjustment meant you have to change the structures. Let the state not spend so much into the social sectors and into the infrastructure. Let the state not be involved in business. If you have parastatals and the state is involved in production, sell those assets of the state. Don't spend so much on the social sectors. And there was a saying, education cannot be free for everyone. that health cannot be free for everyone. And for a moment we were blinded and we thought that was good message. It wasn't. It wasn't. This was inviting capitalism of the West tide amongst us. But by agreeing to take that route, we also bought ourselves the space to have our debt forgiven. It took a long period, 5 years of negotiations, 5 years of global actions. I would actually say the period 1991 to about 2001 were one where we're trying to find ways of what is today called debt forgiveness. And this wasn't just a government issue. We had changed the government. There was the MMD now in power. The government was not even the leading force because it did not have the legitimacy over debt forgiveness. If you're a government, you go to foreign governments and multilateral institutions, you are asking for debt, you've got the wrong cards. But if you have organizations that represent the poor people going there, if you have the churches going there and asking for debt forgiveness, it brings different dynamics. And that's what happened. The entire movement for debt forgiveness was not led by governments, or they were not alone in that process. And because of that, we succeeded. We succeeded. There were months around that period where our debt had come down below $1 billion. And that was a huge relief for this economy. We were saying, whatever savings have been made from debt forgiveness, we'll put them into the social sectors. It's like replenishing, reinvigorating the education, the health infrastructure that had drastically deteriorated. So as we enter 2001, Zambia had to ask itself the questions. Yes, we are making savings. We should effectively put those savings to better use, to grow the economy. We should start thinking of improving the infrastructure. And the population had changed. It was no longer a 6 million population. We're going to 10 million. So the growing needs of the population were also adding pressure. There was need for more investments. And those investments were to a large extent going to be funded using domestic resources. And to a smaller extent, using external funding. But even external funding, we had to devise different ways of doing it. There was more aid coming into Zambia around that time. We had foreign direct investment coming in. Of course, we signed some of the most ridiculous development agreements with the mines. We're basically giving away the mines for nothing. We're giving incentives to foreign investment that meant actually that government was not going to get anything in terms of revenue. The grace periods were unheard of. The tax concessions were just laughable. So you had FDI coming into the country, but the public finances were not improving parallel to or together with the levels of FDI that were coming into this country. And also, those development agreements and the incentives that were provided were such that if you give a depreciation of a machine that's going to last you 20 years and you give it to be depreciated within a period of 2 years, what are you doing? You are basically saying these organizations are not going to make a profit. And if they don't make a profit, you can't tax them. And then after 2-3 years, they have made actually the money that should have made in 20 years. And they come back, they register in a different name, and they still enjoy those incentives. So we were getting money coming into the economy, but it was flying out as quickly as it came in. So we ended up with a situation where around 2001, the Manawasa government, they were quite aware of these issues. They were quite aware of this problem. They were a little bit more conscious. Within the capitalist way of doing things, they tried to experiment with PPP arrangements, the public-private partnerships. So in terms of their funding modalities, they were conscious of the fact that they cannot borrow quickly. If they have to borrow, it has to be on multilateral, on concessionary terms. They were also aware that if we go out there on the open market and start borrowing more expensively, this is going to spell a disaster for this economy. But if you want to come up with PPP arrangements, it doesn't work out quickly. It takes you time. And indeed, during that period, from 2001 to 2008, there were a lot of plans. The Lower Kafue Gorge and many others, the airports, the international airports that were supposed to be built, the rehabilitation of Zambia railways, and the roads, the waterworks, electricity grid that was supposed to be improved. So there were a lot of projects on the plans. The question was, how do you fund them? And that government, we may not agree with them in every detail, but they were much more conscious. They went out borrowing, but in most cases, they ensured that at least some concessional terms or conditions were arrived at. But something was soon to happen that would change that picture. And that something was that because of paying less debt, because the kwacha by that time had stabilized. You remember there was a time that the dollar would sell you about 3 kwacha, 3.7 kwacha. There were days that it was even going to 2.8 or somewhere there. So that brought in a lot of confidence, not just amongst the Zambians, but also in the international finance markets. There was an apparent fight against corruption. So all these weighed in an index where Zambia's ratings at the international level became favorable. With a favorable rating, some courage was there that actually we can issue bonds. We can issue sovereign bonds. That's, given the rating that we have as a country, will give us quick money, not tied to the political conditionalities, governance conditionalities that normally go with borrowing. And it sounded good. Some of us warned against it. We say the Zambian economy is very artificial. The issuance of sovereign bonds needs an economy that over a period of 20, 30 years is stable. You can't guarantee that in an economy like Zambia. What looks cheap will turn out to be very expensive. But those that were in power went ahead. They started working with a consortia of international banks and came up with the issuance that was going to spell a disaster. If you remember properly, 2008 we had a global crisis. But Zambia was not really negatively affected at the beginning, around 2008. We're actually very glad that we went through it because the demand in China, the demand in India for base metals was very high. So we survived that crisis somehow. But that demand in China and India was soon to go down. And as the Chinese started readjusting their economy to get it to become more inward oriented, we fell to the pinch. We fell to the pressure. The base metal prices sank drastically. This country was no longer getting the foreign exchange that it had planned its expenditure on. This country was drying up. But this was happening a little bit towards the end after the Rupiah Banda government. And that government did not last long. I think it lasted 3 years. We had the PF government coming into power. And the economy was still birthing under the good regimes. But there were danger signs looming because of the changing international conditions. And we warned against that. We warned them, don't go commercial. Even organizations that at times we don't so much agree with, the World Bank, the IMF, is on record warning Zambia, don't take this route. The PF government that came in was arrogant, was adamant. They were going to take the commercial route. They issued the first tranche, and that first tranche was oversubscribed. And because of that, they felt this is heaven, this is paradise. But reality was soon to visit us. But before that reality could hit home, they issued a second one. They went ahead, issued the second one. And we called it a crime. You're committing a crime. They didn't listen. When it became apparent that the crisis was hitting Zambia, we thought we were going to stop. They didn't. They didn't. Instead, what did they do? They started going around shopping on a shopping spree, literally borrowing wherever they could find space. Apart from issuing bonds, they went out there. They were working with international banks, and they went on borrowing. They borrowed from governments at rates that were not concessional. Even after the demise of SADA, it actually got worse. The IMF warned again. And they said, this doesn't look good. It doesn't look well. That advice was ignored. We weighed in and said, this cannot be okay. That was not listened to. A third issuance was made. And as that was made, it came at huge cost, at high cost. By that time already, the Zambian Eurobonds were trading unfavorable on the secondary market. Those that wanted to buy the Zambian bonds had to pay heavily because it was becoming apparent that this country had gone a step too far. And the question was, how indebted is Zambia within that short period of time? I don't know if any one of you can give me an answer. If someone tells you they know the exact date of Zambia, they know the debt volume of Zambia today, they will be lying to you. Not even those the Minister of Finance will give you the exact figure as of today. And I'll tell you why. They can't know it. They don't know it because they are not reconciling properly. There's a disconnect between those that are going out and negotiating for loans and getting the loans and those that are doing the accounting for that matter. And also when you are doing your debt accounting, what you're paid back in terms of interest and all that, you subtract it. So you have to do some reconciliation for you to know the exact amount of debt that you owe. Early this year, they did that for the period up to December 2017. They had to make an upward adjustment. In June, they did that again, that exercise. They made another upward adjustment, about 8.7 billion. During the budget that Margaret Manakatwe forwarded to us, they also made another upward adjustment. It shows you the accounting for debt is very inefficient. It shows you this country is contracting debt at very high speed. Part of the Euro bond did not go into the infrastructure projects that it was designed to fund. A good proportion of it went into supporting the kwacha. As the kwacha was falling down, there was no option other than to get a good proportion of that amount and push it to propel or support the kwacha. So this country lost close to $600-700 million of very expensive money supporting the local currency. That money did not go to changing the Zambia railways. You read a lot, you wrote a lot about how this was going to transform, what the government was telling you, what they were going to do with this money, the Euro bonds and this and that. They told you they were going to use it for Lower Kafue Gorge. They told you they will initiate projects in Patoka and many others. They told you all these funny stories, but you didn't see it. You didn't see those things coming on board. Because the borrowing now for those projects is being done now. So you should be asking, where did that first borrowing go to? It sank. And when you are sinking money in the system, the banks that you don't own, that this country doesn't control, act like vouchers. You push in the dollars that you have borrowed. What do? They take it out. The shareholders of companies that you privatize, these are not Zambians. So they are pulling that money out. They have to send dividends out of the country. They have to do transfers. So whatever you're bringing in is being sucked out. They're speculating with your economy. They're speculating with your currency. And it's very difficult to manage an economy that way. So you are borrowing to sustain an ill economy, whose infrastructure, whose assets are not owned by Zambia. It's a tall order. The borrowing we did is very different from the borrowing of the 1970s. Of the 1970s, it was cheap. The repayment was spread over a number of years. The borrowing we have done, especially with the issuance of the sovereign bonds, is commercial, it's expensive. And it has got a date of maturity. Date of maturity means when the date comes, 2022, whatever, huge amounts have to be paid back. The interest has to be paid, even now. But there will be a time when this country has to pay out billions of dollars. The theory is that you come up with a sinking fund, and that sinking fund helps you to pay. But how do you come up with a sinking fund if today you are living from hand to mouth? If today you are not able to pay your own teachers, your workers timely, if today we are struggling to come up with a 3-month import cover for our imports, we are in a deep crisis as a country. We are in a deep crisis. What has happened also is that with the commercial debt, because this is money that's given to you, it doesn't have the extra conditionalities like the bilateral and multilateral debt. You do not have people seated in the Ministry of Finance, in the Central Statistics Office, in the Bank of Zambia, monitoring how you're using that money. because of that, we have ended up with a situation where a lot of this money has been wasted. I wouldn't be shocked if today we find out that a lot of that money has ended up to fund the luxurious lifestyles of the elite that's running this country. So again, as I'm saying, it's a big dilemma that this country finds itself in. And Fitch Ratings have been following these trends. They have looked at the Zambian economy and they came to a conclusion that they have to reaffirm the negative ratings that had given us some months back. And just to be clear, Fitch Ratings is one of the top 3 rating agencies in the world. So the system of globalized capitalism has to minimize risks. And it minimizes risks by having rating agencies. This give it like surveillance information. It's surveillance information in the sense of, be careful here, this company can default or can pay back the property. This country can pay back or it can default. Those are the functions of the rating agencies. And Fitch is one of the top 3. Moody and Standard & Poor being the other 2. So you are not talking of a small organization somewhere that doesn't know what it is doing. And the findings, the rating Fitch gives has serious impact in terms of how this country is viewed outside and also at what conditions this country is able to borrow. That's why we have to give it the serious attention that it deserves. And the Socialist Party did sit, as soon as we got to know that on the 11th of September, Fitch had reported the downgrading of Zambia, we did sit down and go to work. What we did was we compared the ratings for Zambia for the 3 top rating agencies. So we have looked at how Fitch has been rating Zambia. We have looked at how Moody has rated us. And we also looked at how Standard & Poor has been rating us in terms of our sovereign issuance. This took time. We had to compare just to be sure Fitch is not working against Zambia. And they have no need to work against Zambia. The other exercise that we undertook was to compare how Zambia is faring with peer countries. How is Uganda featuring? How is Kenya featuring? How is Ghana featuring? And a number of other countries. So we took time to look at that. It is a common phenomenon that maybe all these countries are behaving the same way. If they were, then it's something beyond Zambia. But if the other peers are doing well and Zambia is not doing well, then this is a Zambia-specific issue. So we took time to do that. The other issue that we did was to look at the econometric model that Fitch has been using. Fitch Ratings has got a proprietary econometric model. Proprietary means it's an in-house one. This is a partial equilibrium model. It's an economic model. Sorry for those words, but economists plan. They come up with econometric models. And the one Fitch is using has got 18 variables. So they put in the data for Zambia. And they look at it. And they analyze it. They have also got qualitative aspects. They call them the qualitative overlayers to this model. So if they put in the qualitative overlayers, how does this information look like? So it was not guesswork, and it can't be guesswork. So we spent time looking at that. That maybe that's where the problem is. And we have come to a conclusion. We have seen what has happened And indeed, this is a Zambia-specific issue. It has nothing to do with a problem that many other countries are facing. It has nothing to do with weaknesses in terms of methodology for the rating agencies. What we did was also to look at the 2019 budget that was presented before Parliament on the 20th of September. And how did these figures influence the ratings or the outcome of the econometric modeling? So, as a party, we view the latest downgrading of Zambia's long-term foreign currency issuer from B to B minus, and we're also being given a negative long-term outlook, is a reflection of a downward spiral. This is not a one-off thing. You are talking about an economy that is going downward. Meaning, we can predict today subsequent ratings of Zambia will be worse than what we have today. So this is not a one-off thing. Again, it's a process. The economy, in terms of indicators, has been going down. And as it is going down, it is part of the reflection. That's one. Two, we can conclude also that public debt is the most important impediment in terms of attaining macroeconomic stability. I talked about those constant adjustments that the Minister of Finance was making and how inefficient the accounting system is. And if public debt, especially external debt, is not managed, the situation will be worse than that of the 1980s and early 1990s. Thirdly, the Minister of Finance is well aware of the high risk. In June this year, the ministry did issue a paper, a statement, indicating that the government had intentions to curtail the contraction of new debt and cancel some of the contracted but undisbursed loans. But despite all that, when you read the MTEF is the medium-term expenditure framework. That's normally for the next 3 years. When you read it properly, you realize that there's going to be new external debt contracted. That new external debt that's going to be contracted sorry for that. Maybe we can come here. It's going to be in the range of 3.4 billion. So from now up to 2021, there's still going to be new debt that's going to be contracted. The challenge is that the 3.4 billion new external debt to be contracted will come in very expensive. This is not an economy that will attract credit at concessional terms anymore. And because of that, it will expose the kwacha. The volatility of the kwacha is going to be enhanced. Fourthly, what you see is also the contradictions between policy statements, the policy statements that are being made, or the intentions of government, and actually what happens. If you look at the 2019 budget, there's a huge gap between the policy statements and what ends up happening. The international finance market is picking that. And when they pick it up, the interpretation is that Zambia is telling lies. Zambia is most likely concealing debt. And the interpretation is that, or the speculation is that, we may end up being in a worse situation than that of Greece and Mozambique. You may remember what happened in those countries when they concealed debt. And it came out that actually they were lowering it, but it was much, much higher. When your country is being speculated that way, it's dangerous. And everyone is saying this government must act quickly to take out that negative perception, but they're not doing it. For whatever reasons. They're not doing it. Why would you want to destroy the entire economy? Why aren't you taking action? You are letting perceptions go on that ultimately are a disaster for the economy, a disaster for the millions of Zambians. Is political power sustaining it such an important element that you are ready to destroy this country? So, back to the budget of 2019. It states that it's improving revenue collection, it's bringing in measures. The truth is that the measures are highly inadequate. The measures being introduced to improve revenue collection and to balance the budget are, I would say, far, far inadequate to bring any significant change to the macroeconomy of this country. The other important issue is that governance indicators for Zambia continue to decline. Governance indicators have to do with high levels of corruption, the lack of accountability, misallocation of resources, poor priority setting, and these are all contributing to the dilemma. If you have DFID telling you our man has been misapplied, if you have a fired cabinet minister saying, I didn't steal, ask the president. If you have Norway saying, we are not jokers, we are withdrawing our funding, then you know the situation is serious. No one believes you. No one trusts you. No one believes you. No one trusts you. Your governance indicators go low. So it's a mixture of the hardcore economic indicators, but also the governance record. When you are talking of an austerity program, cutting costs, but at the same time, you are pushing your salaries up for constitutional position holders. At the same time, you are bringing in new vehicles. At the same time, you are planning a lot of these international travelers. And you are buying yourself a jet that costs millions and millions when the livelihoods of Zambians is in jeopardy. It's unacceptable. It is unacceptable. The chances of pulling things together are compromised. Very quickly, what are the implications of the poor rating? One, it means any borrowing from now on is going to be very expensive. Two, it means the Zambian government will increasingly have to go to the Zambian masses, to the poor people, tax them more in order to run government, but also in order to pay back debt. It means the current account deficit of the country is going to widen. And this will continue to increase the demand for foreign exchange and put pressure on the kwacha. So the stability of the kwacha cannot be guaranteed. It also means some short-term liquidity injection will be needed, merely to stabilize the kwacha. Without a deal with the IMF, it's hard to imagine how we can quickly secure that cash injection without exacerbating the debt situation and the deterioration of the kwacha. But a deal with the IMF and an austerity program will mean the PF government is going to lose power in 2021. As things stand, the PF government would rather sacrifice the Zambian economy than lose political power. So the situation is desperate for the country's petty-bourgeois leadership that we have today. It also means that over the next period, we'll see more voucher funds coming into Zambia. The voucher funds are financial entities that pretend to help you to recapitalize your debt. They will negotiate with you to sell them the debt. They will buy it off from you at huge discount. They will go and pay, negotiate that side, part of it, and they make huge money out of it. You will then have to deal with those voucher funds. And in the long run, voucher funds are very expensive. It looks cheap at the beginning. That's why they call them vouchers. They are feasting on a dead hand. And they are hovering. They are coming around Zambia. They started early this year from Turkey and many other countries. They have been coming into Zambia, taking a look at the situation, picking out which credit or loans are we going to fail to pay, which ones they can take up. There's a lot of corruption also involved in doing that. Dealing with voucher funds means there are kickbacks taking place. And at the end of the day, the Zambian people, if you are eaten by vultures, you remain in skeleton. Skeletons are going to remain. The flesh and everything also be gone. That's what vultures do to your economy. The Socialist Party projects that the gross international reserves of Zambia will continue to deteriorate. 3 months of import cover will be difficult to sustain. And our ability to earn foreign exchange, if we don't earn foreign exchange sustainably or in reasonable amounts, the situation is going to be very, very precarious. How about monetary policy? Can we outstretch it? Can we leverage it to ensure economic stability? The answer is no. In the absence of a robust fiscal reform, monetary policy has been already outstretched. It can do more. Bank of Zambia cannot do more under these circumstances. They have tried to hold on over the past 2 years, 3 years now. But both in terms of policy and instruments for monetary policy, the chances are very slim. So, comrades, ladies and gentlemen, that's where we stand as an economy. So the situation is bad. And what should the government do? And we want to provide free advice to the government. What should the government do? Because it's not just about the PF, it's about Zambian lives that are at stake here. Something has to be done, not tomorrow, but it has to be done today. And our presidential candidate for 2021, Comrade Fred, will say something to that. Comrade, what should the government do?
Thanks, Comrade Collins. You have heard for yourselves where we are as a country. It's clear we have a crisis. And not a small crisis, but a gigantic crisis. Any crisis needs ideas. It needs new ideas. It's not ideas that are creating crises. This crisis has not been created by the ideas we are articulating. What we are saying is not going to exacerbate or worsen the crisis we are in. Crises are not created by ideas, but it's crises that generate ideas. Without this crisis, we wouldn't have called you for this press briefing. And the ideas you are hearing from us wouldn't be there. It's the crisis itself that is generating ideas. Comrades, the first step in solving any problem is its admission. For some time, the leadership of this country has denied it has got a problem. It has denied openly it has a debt problem. And why should Eastern Province endure poverty levels of 70% with all that is happening in that province? People don't sleep, they work day and night in Eastern Province. But they are enduring poverty levels of 70%. Number 5 is Muchinga Province with 69.3% poverty levels. Number 6 is Northwestern Province with 66.4% poverty levels. Number 7 is Southern Province with 57.6% poverty levels. Number 8, Central Province with 56.2% poverty levels. Then we have the Copper Belt Province with 30.8% poverty levels and Lusaka 20.2% poverty levels. These are the poverty levels on which this debt burden is being pushed. This is a huge burden already. These are very high poverty levels our people have to endure already. But they have not seen the end of poverty. With the debt crisis that we have, these poverty levels are going to worsen. These figures I'm giving you are not from my head. These are Central Statistical Office figures, a government agency. They are not figures manufactured or produced by the Socialist Party, no. Yes, they are coming from my head because these are important for us who are engaged in causes of the working class. You have to understand the poverty levels to understand the impact of this debt crisis. What should government do? First, with this situation, what should government do? Our advice is 1, admit there's a crisis. 2, try to restore the confidence of the financial markets. 3, build some consensus around the debt situation in the country so that all sectors of our society are mobilized to deal with this issue. To do that, the government needs to start moving on cutting costs. There has to be a reversal of certain policies or decisions that they have made. They have to reverse them. It can't be business as usual. They just can't keep on going as if nothing has happened. No. It's not ikubi siaya. No. There has to be a reversal of certain things, decisions that have been made. There has to be a change in the way we live, the way we govern, the way we manage the affairs of our country. 1, the salaries they have given themselves, they have to reverse them. The increment in the salary of the president and other constitutional office holders has to be reversed. 2, there has to be a 50-60% cut in travel expenses. They just don't have a choice, they have to cut that. 3, they have to reduce the transport costs of government. The automobiles they are buying, the orders have to be cancelled. The maintenance of government vehicles, a cheaper way that is more efficient, more effective, more orderly, has to be found. The plans to buy new jets and other gadgets, military, unnecessary military expenditure that we are reading about, that has to stop. It has to stop. We know they have got difficulties stopping expenditure, because when they stop expenditure, they can steal. Their pockets run dry. Part of this debt that we are battling with today is born out of greedy. For them to steal, they have to have projects, they have to have contracts, they have to have things going on, so that they skim some money out of that. And they don't care where they live in the country. But there are millions and millions of our people who don't have a way out of this other than government doing the right thing. Comrades, this is not about cheap politics. This is about the livelihoods of our people. If we don't deal with the debt issue correctly, forget about a reversal of economic fortunes in this country. We won't see it. It won't happen. And look at where they're spending this money. What are they spending this money on? Look at the projects that they consider very important. Nice roads in Iku. Look at the situation where the poor are. Look at the situation in Garden here. Just look at the situation in Garden here. Are they spending that money in Garden? Are they spending that money in Zingalume? Are they spending that money in Chainda? They are spending that money on themselves. They are spending that money where they have plots, where they have houses. Wherever they have a house, there's a nice road going there. Wherever they have a house, there's clean water there. There's proper sanitation there. And there's nice air, not this air we're breathing here from the sewer dams. These are issues that we can't run away from. And these issues need new ideas, new approaches. They require a very high sense of honesty. They require consideration of the effect of everything on the poor. Let's think about the poor first. They are the majority of this country. The figures are there. They show you that these are the majority. If democracy is about the majority, then let the interests of the working class prevail. Let the interests of the poor peasants prevail and take precedence. Comrades, we have been at this for over an hour. You have other assignments. We don't want to hold you much longer. You understand for yourselves where your country is. It is up to you to interpret that to the masses of our people, to inform them truthfully about the situation their country is in. If you have not understood what we are saying, please feel free to come and engage us. We are doing this with the utmost honesty. Everything that we have said here can be verified. And go and verify it. And you will not find a single comma, a single full stop that is a lie in what we have said. Thank you very much.